The wife, wanting to seize her husband's billions of dollars, shocked everyone by pushing her disabled husband into the middle of the road. A large truck struck the husband and knocked him to the ground. The wife did not take her husband to the hospital, but instead had him taken straight to the funeral home. She hurriedly arranged a funeral for him, and after the guests finished leaving, she called her lover over to have an affair. But what the wife did not know was that the man was not actually dead. The man's vitality was incredibly strong. He had somehow survived the car crash, yet he pretended to be dead the whole time. After the wife and her lover went elsewhere to have sex, the man finally opened his eyes. He quickly grabbed the phone the wife had dropped and began calling his parents, but unexpectedly, the man's voice failed him and he couldn't speak. Meanwhile, on the other side, the wife suddenly noticed there were other sounds in the funeral home. She and her lover hurried back to the funeral room. They did not expect that the man had already prepared for this. He quickly lay back down on the bed, and the lover assumed the wife was just too nervous, but the wife still noticed a flaw in the room. She realized her phone had been turned on. The wife understood that the man was not dead. At that moment, the husband's parents called the wife back. They had heard that their son had died and wanted to rush to the funeral home immediately. However, they encountered a traffic jam on the way, so they asked the wife to preside over the funeral in their stead. On the surface, the wife appeared very filial, telling her parents that the cremation time was approaching, but in her heart, she did not want them to come at all. The parents trusted the wife completely, and they hung up the phone without hesitation. After dealing with the husband's parents, she immediately grabbed a kettle of scalding hot water with the intention of scalding the man to death. Although the man was still alive, his body was extremely weak, and he didn't dare to open his eyes. Just as the wife was about to succeed, a noise suddenly came from outside the room. It turned out to be the funeral home's staff arriving. The wife and her lover panicked at once. They hurriedly put on funeral clothes to greet the staff. The staff were preparing to move the husband's body for cremation. Meanwhile, on the other side, the husband heard the staff's voices. He tried to shout for help, but no sound would come from his throat. So the husband threw the ring in his hand onto the curtain opposite him. Sure enough, the staff noticed the sound. They wanted to check what was going on. A small cat suddenly appeared there. The wife let out a breath of relief. To prevent the staff from discovering the husband was alive, she volunteered to move her husband's body herself. The staff assumed she simply wanted to spend more time with him, and they agreed to her request. The wife's plan succeeded once again. She tied her husband tightly to the bed and then put him into the vehicle used to transport bodies. The lover stood outside the vehicle as a lookout. The funeral home staff had already climbed into the driver's seat, ready to drive away. The husband kept struggling desperately and calling for help, but he could neither make a sound nor free himself from the ropes. The wife smiled triumphantly, taunting him as a useless piece of trash. The husband glared at his wife in fury, which made the wife even happier. She removed a stocking from one of her legs and actually intended to strangle the husband to death with it. At that moment, the husband's parents suddenly arrived at the scene. They desperately wanted to see their son one last time. The lover blocked the parents, saying the funeral home's rules didn't allow them to open the vehicle now. The staff then came over. The parents dropped to their knees before the staff. They begged, saying they only wanted to see their son once more. The staff were deeply moved and agreed to the parents' request. The lover was very surprised, but he couldn't stop the husband's parents. The vehicle's door was quickly opened. The wife inside the car was holding a stocking, pretending to wipe her husband's face. It turned out the wife had just heard the noise outside, and she had quickly rendered her husband unconscious by strangling him. Before the wife could hide the stocking, the parents opened the car door. They found the scene very strange, and began asking the wife what she was doing. The wife claimed it was her husband's peculiar habit, saying she wanted to wipe his face one last time. The parents believed the wife's words, and they entrusted their son to her with relief. Little did they know they had missed the best chance to save him. Not long after, the vehicle carrying the husband was driving on the road. The husband came out of his faint again. He happened to see the wife making a phone call. It turned out the wife had planned to kill her husband a year earlier, and had taken out a $50 million accidental death insurance policy on him. The husband thought the wife was evil beyond belief, and he vowed in his heart that if he ever got out alive, he would make her pay a terrible price. The wife noticed the husband had woken up, and she mocked him as being too stupid, boasting arrogantly that she would inherit all of his estate. Then, suddenly, the car abruptly stopped. A police officer had flagged the car down. It turned out a fugitive had suddenly run across this road, and everyone passing through had to get out of their vehicles for inspection. The wife had no choice but to leave the carriage, and she presented the relevant documents to the officer. At that moment, the wife did not know that the husband in the carriage had managed with difficulty to sit up. He pounded on the car window desperately, calling for help. Everyone outside heard the noise. The police immediately questioned the funeral staff about the sound. The staff were extremely puzzled, because there was supposedly only a corpse inside the car. So why was there a sound coming from it? The wife also tried hard to prevent the police from searching, but the officer was very cautious and insisted on opening the carriage to inspect. So, under the officer's resolute gaze, the wife, feeling guilty, opened the car door.